Hi, I'm Mrs. Shepherd, and this presentation is on remembering after the test. Learning objectives. The learning objectives today are for students to be able to identify weak study methods for long-term learning, for students to be able to evaluate study practices that will strengthen learning by the amount of effort required in a follow-up after the course, and for students to be able to create study material that will require varying levels of effort to strengthen long-term learning. Poor judges. Rereading text and highlighting text are the methods that learners choose most often, but research shows these are among the least effective tools to strengthen long-term learning or help in being able to remember after you take the test. People choose to study one skill until it is mastered, instead of changing the subject or skill they are practicing before they have it mastered, even when they do better on tests if they switch things up while studying. Easy isn't better. Research shows that if you put a small amount of effort into finding the correct answer, you will not remember the information as long as if you had to work hard for the answer. Reflection question 1. Which of the following are examples of weak study strategies? A. Create flashcards and use them to test yourself over time. B. Cram for 8 hours the night before the test. C. Highlight the most important information while reading the textbook. Or D. Rereading a list of questions and answers. Pause this slide to consider your choices. When you have selected your answers, push play. Reflection question 1 answers. The following are examples of weak study strategies. B. Cram for 8 hours the night before the test. C. Highlight the most important information while reading the textbook. And D. Rereading a list of questions and answers. Creating flashcards and using them to test yourself over time would require effort that is spaced over time and would strengthen learning. Reflection question 2. Which answers are true about switching subjects or skills that you are studying before you have it mastered? A. You will score higher on tests in the long term than if you studied only one subject at a time until it was mastered. B. You will score lower on tests in the long term than if you had studied only one subject at a time until it was mastered. C. You are more likely to stop studying for the rest of the test. Or D. People prefer to study one subject or skill until it is mastered over this method. Pause this slide to consider your choices. When you have selected your answers, push play. The correct answers are A. You will score higher on tests in the long term than if you studied only one subject at a time until it was mastered. And D. People prefer to study one subject or skill until it is mastered over this method. There are several study strategies that will give you better results than just rereading or highlighting. Research shows that if you space out your study sessions, you will remember the information longer. Your brain reinforces connections to memories that you make during the day while you sleep. This is another benefit of spacing out your study sessions over time. Consolidation. The process of your brain reinforcing connections about what you learned during the day is called consolidation. This process helps connect new information to information that you already knew. Reflection question 3. The most effective study strategy to remember information long after the test is to A. Cram for 8 hours the night before the test. B. Highlight the most important information while reading the textbook. C. Space out your study sessions to give yourself time to start forgetting the information. Or D. Reread the textbook right before the test. Pause the slide to consider your choices. When you have selected your answer, push play. The correct answer is C. Space out your study sessions to give yourself time to start forgetting the information. Recalling the information after you start forgetting is another way that you are using effort in your learning. When learning requires more effort, it lasts longer. Just rereading material doesn't require enough effort to stay with you. The material might stay with you for a short while, but it won't stay with you until after you take the test. It might not even stay with you until you take the test. More effort can come from the space between study sessions. By giving yourself a little time to forget, you are also requiring more effort to recall the information. Studies show that students who test or self-test can retrieve information longer than those who cram. More effort can come from writing all that you know about a topic and relating it to another topic. The act of writing the information down helps your brain actively process the information. More effort can mean anything that requires you to work harder to produce the answer. Desirable difficulties are the things you do or that happen to slow down and strengthen learning because they require more effort, but they are things that you can do. For instance, trying to generate or guess the answer before you know how to solve the problem, quizzing yourself on information that you just read, and connecting new information to things that you already know are all examples of strategies that require more effort. Reflection question 4. Which of the following answers are the benefits of spacing out your studying over time? A. Everyone likes a break. B. It takes more effort to remember the information that you started to forget. C. Your brain links new information to old information while you sleep. Slowing down learning strengthens learning. Pause this slide to consider your choices. When you have selected your answers, push play. Reflection question 4 answers. B. It takes more effort to remember the information that you started to forget. C. Your brain links new information to old information while you sleep. And D. Slowing down learning strengthens learning. When what you are learning is meaningful to you, it lasts longer. Taking a concept and putting it to use or reflecting on its value in a real-world situation makes the abstract concept more concrete and gives it more meaning. This meaningful information is more likely to be recalled. For long-term learning, keep testing yourself on the information over time, even if you feel like it's slowing you down. We have a tendency to think that we have something mastered as soon as we start to know the information and stop testing ourselves too soon. So, if you are using flashcards or a Quizlet to study, don't stop just because you got the answers right 1 or 2 times. Keep going over them for several days or weeks if you can. Reflection question 5. Write down or tell a friend what kind of strategies strengthen learning and help you remember after the test. Push play when finished. Reflection question 5 answers. Some of the items that you discussed may have been connecting new information to things that have meaning to you. Connecting new information to things that you already knew. Spreading out study sessions over days and weeks to give your brain a chance to make connections about what you learned while you sleep. Adding or taking away information to make your study session require more effort. You strengthen learning by moving to the next subject before you master the first subject. Mixing up the subjects or skills you are working on slows down the learning process in a good way. In a study, one group of students worked on similar types of math problems grouped together, and then moved on after they mastered that skill. A second group mixed up the different types of math problems as they were studying. The second group, the group that mixed up the type of math problems, did better on the test a week later than the group that practiced one skill until it was mastered. Even though the first group did better right after the studying was complete, when you mix up the areas that you are studying, your brain has to work harder to identify information. Your brain doesn't have to process which skill to use when doing the same thing over and over. Even though it might seem like sticking with the same skill until you have it mastered helps you learn better, over time you won't remember as much as if you had to figure out which skill to use during the learning process. Mixing up your skills or subjects helps you go from knowing for the test to remembering it after the test. Reflection question 6. Write down or tell a friend if it's better to study one skill or subject until you have it mastered and then move on to the next skill, or to move on to the next skill before you have the first skill mastered. Why? Push play when finished. Reflection question 6. You may have discussed some of the following items. Study one skill for a while, then switch to another skill or subject before you master the first. Switching skills will slow you down, which means it takes more effort and strengthens learning. If you only study one skill until it is mastered, you go faster, it doesn't take as much effort, and you probably won't remember it as long. Suggestion 1. Creating manual flashcards or electronic flashcards using apps such as Quizlet or Anki can help you test yourself over time to see how well you are remembering the information. Set a schedule for how often you will study the flashcards over days and weeks. Resist the urge to stop studying after only a few sessions. Suggestion 2. Create study questions to ask yourself about what you just read. When you test yourself for understanding, you are strengthening learning. Studies show that students who test or self-test after reading do better than those who just reread the same material. Suggestion 3. Learning is strengthened when you put more effort into it. Try to guess or generate the answer or solution before you look at the answer. Suggestion 4. Learning is strengthened when you change the skill or subject that you are studying before you master it. Move on to a new subject or skill, then go on to a third topic. or back to the first. Reflection question 7. Write down or tell a friend an example of ways that you could study several types of math problems that would require effort, would strengthen learning, and would help you remember how to do the problems after the test. Push play when finished. Reflection question 7 answers. Some of your answers may have been to space out your studying over several days, to study the first kind of problem for a while, then move on to the next, then the next before you have any mastered, to mix up the order that you are solving them when you start to feel like you know what you're doing. Reflection question 8. Which of the following are examples of websites that you can use to make flashcards? A. Anki.com, B. IDoRecall.com, C. Brainscape.com, D. Quizlet.com. Pause the slide to consider your choices. When you have selected your answers, push play. All of the choices are correct. Now for a quick review of our time together today. Don't cram. Space your study sessions out. It takes a little more effort when you give yourself a little time to forget. Work hard. The more effort you put into learning, the longer the information will stay with you. Create study materials that make you work harder and slow you down. Mix it up. By mixing up the skills that you are practicing, you are slowing yourself down before you master them. You are making your brain work harder as you are learning the material. Your reward will be remembering the skill or information after the test. Thank you for your time today. I hope that you feel that you can identify weak study methods better, evaluate your own study practices by the amount of effort that is required, and create study materials that require varying levels of effort to strengthen your learning. These skills will help you remember after the test.